Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into how a single 17th century philosopher basically built the absolute framework for our modern world. If you've ever wondered where the foundational concepts of our democratic societies actually came from, well, you are in the exact right place. We're going to unpack the brilliantly radical mind of John Locke. Here is our roadmap for today's Explainer. We'll be looking at 6 key concepts, starting with the blank slate, moving on to natural rights and property, toleration and religion, the social contract, the right to revolution, and finally wrapping up with his legacy and criticism. It's a fascinating, logical progression that builds step by step from the intimate micro level of the human mind all the way out to the macro level of full-blown societal revolution. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the blank slate, and explore Locke's empiricism, because before we can understand how a whole society works, we really have to look at how Locke viewed the very starting point of human existence. Now, what's really interesting here is how Locke defined our earliest moments through a concept called Tabula Rasa, or the blank slate. He firmly believed we are not just born with innate ideas already loaded into our brains. Instead, every single facet of your character is something you observe, perceive, and learn via your senses while interacting with society. Biologically speaking, this heavily favors nurture in the classic nature versus nurture debate. And philosophically, it's incredibly powerful because it sets the absolute stage for human free will. We are completely malleable. That brings us right into Section 2, natural rights and property, focusing on our inalienable rights. Since we possess this free will and a totally malleable mind, we have to zoom out a bit. How do we apply our learned behavior to our fundamental individual rights to get the best outcomes for ourselves? Well, Locke based his entire political theory on the idea of 3 inalienable rights: the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to property. But where do these actually come from? For Locke, these rights came directly from God, the Creator. And because humans are ultimately the property of God, Locke argued that denying anyone these specific natural rights is a literal direct affront to the Creator. And this brilliantly illustrates his modern relevance. I mean, the American founders essentially copied Locke's homework when they were drafting the Declaration of Independence. They took his exact 3 rights and made one slight yet deeply crucial modification, swapping out property for the pursuit of happiness. It's exactly why he is universally known as the original classical liberal. But let's look a little closer at that idea of property. Because to Locke, it was profound. He believed that property begins fundamentally with the ownership of oneself. You own your essence, your soul, and no one can ever take that from you. Externally, the earth provides a shared bounty given by God. So how do you claim a piece of it? Well, imagine walking through the woods and finding an apple tree. By mixing your personal labor and effort with it, actually climbing the tree and plucking that apple, you justify that the apple is now your exclusive property. Locke even postulated that simply building a physical fence around a field was a perfectly effective way to mix your labor with God's bounty and officially claim it. So the crucial point here is, if every single person has these individual natural rights and entirely owns themselves, how on earth do we interact with people who are fundamentally different from us? That brings us to Section 3, toleration and religion, and the concept of respecting the soul. Locke actually formulated his views here by observing the intense, bloody religious conflicts of the English Civil War during his youth. Again, invoking that tabula rasa, his real-world experiences heavily shaped his definition of toleration. And listen, true toleration doesn't mean you have to suddenly embrace everything you disagree with. It's an axiomatic disagreement with something, whether that's another faith, race, sexual orientation, or even just a rival soccer team, while still allowing it to peacefully exist. Because the soul is the ultimate sacred property of the individual, nobody has the right to govern it except that individual. You can strongly oppose a path someone takes, but true toleration means you simply allow it to exist. This was highly personal for Locke. He was born a Puritan, later converted to a Socinian, and lived his life through some incredibly religiously ambiguous times. But he arrived at a very firm belief: absolutely no political authority has the right to decide the religion of their people. Furthermore, if our bodies are the property of God, it becomes a natural law not to kill. Murder isn't just a horrific crime against a person. To Locke, it was directly harming the property of God himself. Let's move along and see how this builds into Section 4, the social contract, and the necessity of limited government. We've gone from the blank slate of the mind to individual rights to tolerating others. Now, how do these self-owning individuals actually come together to form a functioning society? You have to remember, the political norm in Locke's era was the exact opposite of what he wanted. It was a strict feudal social hierarchy dominated by a massive political leviathan, a monarch with all power vested entirely in one individual. In stark contrast to that leviathan, Locke advocated for a deeply modest governmental structure. He recognized that the difference between strict right and human desire is often a really tricky gray area. So government shouldn't be a dominating leviathan. It should merely be a neutral judge of law, deciding that gray area with no right whatsoever to unnecessarily interfere in the lives of the individual. He formalized this exact idea through the social contract. Locke argued that without a governmental body, states naturally devolve into violence, rooted entirely in fear and a total lack of confidence in one's own protection. So people make a mutual agreement. They willingly surrender just a few of their rights to a government, and in exchange, they receive the protection and peaceful social existence that the law provides. The absolute key here is that legitimate authority requires the people's consent. The government must be beholden to the people, rather than the people being beholden to the government. But I want you to think about this for a second. What happens when that neutral judge stops being neutral? What if the government totally fails to protect those natural rights of life, liberty, and property? Okay, that brings us right into the ultimate climax of Locke's societal building blocks. Section 5, the right to revolution, giving power to the people. This was the single most radical idea to ever come from Locke's pen. He became the very first person in recorded history to suggest that if people disapprove of their government, if that sacred social contract is broken, they possess the absolute power to change it as they see fit. Governmental legitimacy relies entirely on the consent of the governed. If the Leviathan returns, the people have a fundamental right to tear it down. Let's wrap up this explainer by looking at Section 6, Legacy and Criticism, and examine Locke today to see exactly how these foundational ideas hold up in our modern world. Ultimately, Locke's micro-theories of the malleable mind and personal property successfully built the macro framework for the modern liberal democracies we see today. His enduring legacy is the ideal of a small government with a very limited scope, acting not as a ruler, but as a mere support beam for the people. He provided the exact moral foundation for the liberal state, ensuring that no matter what, the people remain the ultimate authority. However, his philosophy is certainly not without its detractors. I want to leave you with this main criticism to ponder. If Locke considers the preservation of the self as the absolute main goal of human life, claiming property, protecting your own life and liberty, does that simply reduce human nature to a negative concept of psychological egoism? Are we all really just self-interested blank slates frantically building fences around our apple trees? Consider your own natural rights and ask yourself how they truly shape the society you live in today. Thanks for joining this explainer, and keep questioning the framework of our world.